When it comes to the world of Black Clover, we've seen more than our fair share of powers and weapons in this insane universe, but as we rush towards the conclusion of Black Clover's manga, one thing has been made absolutely clear, which is that Asta's swords are going down as easily being the most overpowered weapons that we have in the series, which is why in today's newest Black Clover video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know or might not know about Asta's anti-magic swords. Just to be clear, to say Asta's anti-magic swords are only used to nullify magic is to do a rather large disservice to the swords themselves and their impact, and I'm going to explain to you why in this video that that's the case. Asta, as of right now, is in possession of 4 very unique swords, being one short of having 5 to match the number of Clovers that's on his grimoire. However, the 4 swords that he does possess are absolutely insane, and as part of the reason for this is due to Asta's immense physical strength, which came from years of training his body through methods like doing 1,000 single-handed push-ups and 1,000 sit-ups and other physical training to reach superhuman levels of strength to compensate for his lack of magic power. This combined with his natural speed that makes the untrained eye believe he's using magic to amp up his abilities, his ability to use ki both to sense his enemies and the ability to use Zedden to increase the power of his attacks, and Asta's borderline unrivaled swordsmanship honed after years of training and all the intense battles that he's been through. Asta is the only one who is truly suited to use these anti-magic blades, because only he can pull out the true power to the extent that he's done so far, and that's before we start factoring in things like the Devil Union amps. Now, the swords themselves, they can be used in the way that the name implies. They can be used as tools to be anti-magic, to nullify magic by infusing the swords with its own anti-magic that comes from Asta's grimoire, but they can also be used as a simple melee weapon that's meant to do physical damage. But let's take it a step further, because the swords on their own as an individual blade actually have varying degrees of usefulness that each of them have. For instance, when we look at the Demon Slayer sword, it's the first sword that Asta actually got that gained the ability to enlarge the blade of the sword by using anti-magic, and using the flat side of his Demon Slayer sword, he's able to deflect spells that are aimed at him. However, being the madman that he is, this wasn't enough for Asta, and during his training he underwent at the Heart Kingdom, Asta's skill with the sword went up another level by being able to use anti-magic to control the sword in varying different ways, ranging from riding it through the air like we see other magic knights ride on their brooms, and he's able to summon the sword next to him by extending his hand, which that adds another layer of offense to Asta's actual arsenal, because he's no longer bound by just using plain old fighting styles that you would see in grounded combat, but he can also now take to the skies unassisted, and if he ever needs to actually free up his hands to engage in other forms of combat or evasive maneuvers like we saw in the Dante battle, he can do so and still have the option to call the Demon Slayer sword back to him whenever the situation calls for it. What's also really interesting about this blade is under the circumstance under which Asta gained possession of it. Back when Asta first failed to get a grimoire, but he saw his rival Yuno get the famed 4-leaf grimoire, Asta summoned both his 5-leaf grimoire as well as his sword because of his desire to protect Yuno, who had previously been getting attacked, which just from a parallel perspective makes this very beautiful when we consider how it actually mirrors Asta's usage of the Demon Slayer katana just off of the circumstances under which Asta actually gains this sword. The fact that it is able to cut through spells and magic makes it the perfect sword for Asta because of the fact that it makes up for its own lack of magic, and it in of itself allows him to stand up to the very society where magic is viewed as being everything, and the amount of magic that you have plays a role in your status. But before Asta and Asta's sword, all magic is basically meaningless. Also, from a narrative perspective, the sword stands out because it allowed Asta to be connected to his adopted brother Libe, who was taken in by Asta's mother many years before the first chapter of Black Clover took place. Another interesting thing about this sword is that when Asta uses this sword, he can use the Black Divider, which basically condenses the anti-magic to the edges of his sword and makes it a monster to deal with in a battle from a close range perspective, and it's one of the attacks that Asta utilizes in the series. It makes it pretty clear just how high his ceiling is in terms of power, because when we first see Asta use the Black Divider, it quickly became clear that Asta still had a few more gears inside of him that he hadn't reached yet in terms of power. This was merely Asta scratching the surface. Now, the next sword is the Demon Destroyer sword. What makes this sword so interesting is the fact that it might very well be Asta's most overpowered sword in terms of Hack's ability. ability. By using this sword, Asta is able to make anti-magic tendrils that can both absorb spells and remove the effects of spells, and it is powerful enough to outright negate powerful magic like reincarnation magic. The sword, like the others, is summoned out of Asta's grimoire. The blade itself stands out because it has a wide edge with the Clover symbol on it. Its unique ability is the causality break, which borders on being a blade that breaks the laws of nature due to how it can sever the cause and effect relationship of what it touches. The blade makes those tendrils of anti-magic magic that draws in the magic that is affected by those it hits, but it's not just limited to the magic spells themselves, but it's shown the ability to reverse some of the damage done by said spells, like say when it reversed the damage done by magic-based poison long after it actually already set in, which is something that sets it apart from all the other swords, because the other anti-magic swords that Asta uses aren't able to do this unless the magic is being fresh and actively used. Taking a step further, after Asta mastered Zedden, he's shown being able to create a mini barrier that can cancel out magic of any attacks that are coming in towards him so long as he's holding the sword. The thing about this sword that also stands out too from a narrative perspective is that it has links to the elves in the history of this blade, and its former wielder allow Asta, someone who aspires to be Wizard King one day, the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of those in the past who were once very powerful leaders of magic themselves. That's a huge thing to consider when looking back at the elf invasion arc and seeing the sword being used. It was almost as if this sword was needed for Asta to be shown that with great power comes great responsibility for those who want to be a leader of men. The Demon Dweller sword was the second sword that Asta got his hands on, which allows him to shoot off anti-magic slashes, to attack his enemy from a distance, to either damage or cut down spells being fired off at a long range by his enemy. The sword can also absorb magic, but when it does this, it literally adds the magical attributes of the magic that he's absorbed. Another thing that makes this sword so insane is the fact that we learn early on in chapter 22 of the manga that this sword is not to be taken lightly, because if any magic knight except for Asta tries to wield this sword, it will quickly drain their mana reserves, and that's on top of it just being extremely heavy in weight, making Asta someone with superhuman strength and no magic inside of his body, the ideal human to wield this sword. In my opinion, the thing that makes this sword as cool as it is that whereas Asta's first sword had a huge narrative impact on things like, say, saving Yuno and connecting Asta to his adoptive brother, this sword on the other hand represents Tabata's theme of Black Clover. We see the bonds of friendship and togetherness on full display here with this sword, in the way that Asta is able to borrow the magic power of his friends, allowing him to use magic that he otherwise would not be able to use in a way that is completely befitting for him. It's almost as if this was a way to further include Asta, the outsider country bumpkin who grew up on the outskirts of the Clover Kingdom in a church, to include him in the most Asta way possible in a world where magic is everything. He can't use magic on his own, but using this sword, he's able to use the magic of his friends when he absorbs the magic from them later on and send his own anti-magic to them in the final arc, which brings Asta full circle with the second blade that he gets in the series. Now, it's also worth noting that when this sword is not being used to cut through magic, it's just a standard sword that can inflict major damage onto his enemy due to the combination of his own insane strength as well as the weight of the sword. When he does absorb magic with the sword's blade will change color to match the magical attribute of the magic that is absorbed. Like when he absorbed Noelle's magic, the blade, it turned blue just like the color of her water magic. However, the sword doesn't just shoot off magic of others, it also shoots off anti-magic as well. The sword can also connect Asta to his allies, as mentioned earlier, which allows him both to draw on their magic for his sword as well as transmit magic to his allies. We see as much in Black Clover chapter 367, where Asta uses the sword and transmits his anti-magic to his allies, cloaking them in the power of his anti-magic, and this is very likely due to the fact that Asta's mastered the power of Zedden, which he learned in the Land of Sun, i.e. Yami's homeland, which is a nice way to wrap up this video and talk about the final sword that Asta's in possession of. Asta's final sword is another beauty because of what it symbolizes, which is his Demon Slayer katana, the sword that Yami gives Asta during the battle with Dante, almost as if that was a passing of the torch. Asta, using this blade, is able to selectively cut whatever he wants, so not everything that Asta cuts with his blade will be harmed because it depends on his will at that point in time. It shares attributes like the other swords in that it's able to cut through magic and magic spells with ease, like a knife through butter, and when he uses it, he can shoot off slashes of anti-magic like with the Demon's Dweller sword. But when he goes into his Devil Union mode, that's where things get interesting, because the slashes he fires off allows Asta's will to take over, in the sense that it only does damage to those who he wants to do harm. However, that's going to be it for talking about the significance and the powers and abilities of all of Asta's swords. Let me know which sword is actually your favorite, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more Black Clover content.